Hello and welcome to CS264 Software Design. This is Lecture 4 and this is Lesson 4. And in this short lesson we're going to see about how we might work with JSON using C#. And remember, JSON is the JavaScript object notation, and we use JSON extensively in CS230 web information processing. So we know that it's a standard text-based format for representing structured data based loosely on the JavaScript object syntax. We also saw BSON as well when we were working with MongoDB. So it's commonly used for transmitting data in web applications. So I'd recommend reviewing some of your JSON using the MDF, Mozilla Developer Framework, documentation, which is located here. It's a nice summary of JSON. Okay, so we're going to begin this lesson by working with the built-in system.text.json package. And it's these capabilities are provided as part of the default C#. And we may have a quick look at the end about a third-party package called newtonsoft.json or json.net. And so, but you would need to install the package. But then we saw how to do that in the last lesson. So we'll see how we get on with the 10 minutes. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning of working with JSON and C#. So the system.text.json namespace, I think that provides all the necessary tools that you're going to need in order to be able to work with JSON. There are classes there that facilitate serialization of objects into JSON text, deserialization of JSON text into objects. It has UTF support and UTF-8 support. That's built into the system.text.json namespace package as well. So the sample program that I'm going to use for this particular lesson demonstrates a number of key actions that you'll probably need for your work for this particular module. Not much more. So we set up some JSON using verbatim string literals. We'll parse JSON, so we'll see how to parse JSON from string literals. We'll see how to write prettified JSON to a file or beautified. We can convert C# objects to JSON using some serialization, and we can deserialize JSON into a specific object as well. What I haven't done in this particular one is I haven't shown you how to use the namespace to load JSON from a stream, but you might be able to figure that out if you went through and worked through the lesson 2 earlier. How to use the JSON UTF-8 JSON reader to read some UTF encoded JSON text. You may need that, you may not, but you could figure out how to do that. And again, how to use the JSON element enumerate array to enumerate values in some JSON array. And that's a JSON element. But you may or may not need that kind of thing. But there's lots of information and documentation online around that, and you could have a look at the Microsoft documents which tell you about serializations and system text .json how-to, so full how-to document there. Well, let's have a quick look at the demo program we're going to use for this particular lesson. It's quite a long one. You can see it's long, but I put everything in here that I thought you might like into one space, and then it might be useful. So what's important, I guess, is that we're using system.text.json for the bulk of this. System.io we need for a little bit of other stuff later on. We'll come to that again. So I'm also creating a simple record class because we're going to use that for serialization. So the records we have are name and occupation address, and then we have something we're overwriting the string method here, so that when we print or we write using console.writeLine, we cast essentially this object to a string, and we use this format here. So it's a useful method to have. Again, we're overriding the method that was inherited from the default object. Okay, when we created this class. Okay, so that's a little bit of something we'll use later in the application. First thing we'll do is going to set up some verbatim string literals. Okay, so the first one is just a single record, and it's name, occupation, and lecture address. So John Keating, lecture, Maynooth. And then we're going to have an array, a JSON array, where we have name, John Doe, occupation demonstrator, address Maynooth, Jane Bloggs, occupation tutor, address Selbridge. So we're just creating this JSON array, and that's fine for us. It's an array here. And we probably could have made this a little bit better, but there's so many ways in which you can set up and run and organize your JSON. I mean, how you process it depends on what you're processing in many respects. And I think that's what's important in all of this is that, you're going to be working with data in a particular format that you understand is coming from some API or somewhere, and then you need to be able to process that appropriately. It's not like you're going to be working with some unknown set of data, JSON, although you can do that as well, of course, by parsing the tokens as they come along and build up some representation of what data is coming. But generally, programs know what to expect. So anyway, we're going to use this JSON document, which is provided by system.text.json, and that creates a variable called docJSON in this case here, and it parses the data. Okay, so it parses the data, which is a collection of records here. And then we're going to get the root for that. So we're able to pull out the root element so we can know where to start. And once we have the root element, we can just write the root, and this is provided for us. So should we see some output? Then we know that this particular record has 2 entries here, so we just put out the first one, the second one, and we could iterate over a loop on this, and we could write out the data for this. Let's run it and see what happens for a start. Okay. Okay, you can see that it printed the data for us. Let me just clear this and run it again. Okay, and so it printed the JSON, then it printed the 2 records. Okay, so we might want to actually iterate over the contents of those those JSON strings as well. So let's go back to this. Okay, so we got a property, and then we individually selected a property from the records. Okay, from the first record, from the second record. So we're able to get access to the individual elements by just specifying the property here. Okay, and then we were able to do it for each of those. Okay, so that was one way to do. So now we want to look at the individual record. So that was me parsing the data. We can also look at the individual record, and we could do something similar with this. And this allows us to be able to, again, create a record of parsing this particular record. And you see this JSON document.parse is the way we do this. Again, we select the root element, and we can just write that individual record. And if we go back to our output, we can see with the record, we were able to look at the record and see the record as well. Okay. Now, something we want to be able to do as well is we want to be able to write to a file. So we might want to write to a file. Let's write the document. Let's write to the file, but let's prettify it as well. So we're creating a file using file string. When we saw that in an earlier lesson, we have our file name. We're using a verbatim string to specify the file, and then we're writing to the file. So we're creating a writer, which is a UTF-8 JSON writer that writes, and it sets this indentation to be true. So we just write it to a file, and so it tells us that we wrote to the file, and we can actually look and see that it wrote to the file. If we go to VS Code, we should see over here we have this data file with JSON. We click on this, and we see it wrote the records to the file, and it made it prettified as well, or beautified. Okay, so that's nice. Now, the next thing we wanted to be able to do is we wanted to convert objects to JSON using serialization. So let's create an object. So we have this object, which was a record object that we had earlier. I'm creating a new variable here of this type record. I'm assigning these values to the instance variables. Okay, and then I'm going to serialize that object to JSON. So I'm using the Json Serializer to serialize this record to the string here to object JSON, and then I'm going to write this to the display. Okay, and we'll see what happens when we do that. We should get some JSON from this object. Okay, so let's go and have a look at this. Serialize, so I just have the detail. Okay, very nice. We have this, it's nice. So it works fine for us. We could actually prettify that as well by deserializing the object here and then writing it in prettified format here using the Json Serializer. Okay, directly to the command line. We previously did something similar by writing to a file. You can see that I've done this where I've got nice pretty serialization to the console as well. Finally, I'm going to deserialize the JSON to some object using deserialization. So we're going to start with the record. So we're creating a new record here, okay? And that's going to be deserializing this record. Remember, record was our variable that just was a string up here, so it's a string. And remember that our record was a class, okay? And it contained, the class here, contain the information we need. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to deserialize this, okay, by using the deserialize method here, and I'm casting to a record. That's important. So I'm taking the string, JSON string, I'm using the Json Serializer to deserialize to this particular one, and then we're creating this record. Okay, and then we're going to just print this object that we've created here, and we know that this object has a class record, and if that's the case, then when we say write, we should be able to write and get that and cast. We should call the .toString method, and you'll notice from earlier on that we called and created this this toString method here. So we should get, instead of the list of JSON, we should get John Keating works as a lecturer in Maynooth or something, okay, which is the data that we'd set from the record. So we swing and look at this, and we get the deserialization, and we see John Keating works as a lecturer in Maynooth. So it's a way to deserialize, and then the deserialization doesn't do the printing of the string. The deserialization converts from the JSON and matches it as best it can into our record object. So we knew what kind of JSON we were expecting, so we can create this object from this JSON to work in our C# programs, and then we just call the CString method when we were printing it. And you'll notice from this piece here that we're able to access the individual components as well once we've deserialized. So let's do that, and you can see that we just were able to take the object and take those properties of that object. By just printing this. Obviously, it would be much better to use getter and setter methods to do all this kind of thing, but this just works. Okay, so that's it for the application program. Let's go back to our code here. Something that's interesting as well is you might want to scrape JSON from the web, okay? So, and use it in an application. So either as a string, or you might want to serialize it to an object. So you can use the system.net namespace to be able to do this, to get access to a web client. That makes a HTTP call to a JSON server. So you can process this, as you saw earlier in that demo program. And if you have some idea of the structure of the JSON, then it's easy to serialize the object. It's much more complex, I think, when you have to process the JSON token step by step as you deserialize. So you can modify the program that I've given there. So let's add this piece to the top of our program. And let's go up here and let's... so we can see we've added system.net. It's not been used currently, so it's grayed out. Let's create a little bit more space. And let's go down to the bottom of the program and add in this code here. Okay. And I reformatted there, so it looks nice. So what's happening here is that we have, we're creating this web client, which is provided by the networking namespace. Then I'm actually creating some JSON, creating a type here, an unspecified type here, by using this client to download a string, which I'm downloading the string, which is the blockchain ticker. And then I'm creating, as I did before, a JSON document, and I'm able to pull out the information from this, and I'm able to write something about this. So you'll see this JSON that I pull down, and it's really a list of a ticker about financial data. We'll to print the financial data for the US dollars because I know that it's the property there. And then I'm trying a different URL where I'm using the JSON placeholder to look at the to-dos that are online. And again, I'm pulling out and I'm looking at the first to-do entry. Again, it's a different kind of structured JSON, and I'm appropriately referencing the information that's been parsed because I know what it looks like. So you can go to the blockchain and have a look. And you just get this kind of information here. And if you look at the to-do one, okay, so you can see there's lots of different kinds of this. So the structure of the JSON will be different and we can process it. But we can run the program now. And you'll see that I was able to pull back all the information here, all this JSON, as we expected. I was able to pull out the US dollar one, and I was able to pull out the first of the information that I had in the second one. So we were able to read the JSON as a string from a web client and from a web server using the built-in web client, process it in much the same way. So we can get our JSON from lots of places, from files, from internally our program, from objects, or from the web. So we can do all sorts of really fun things with JSON. You can also use newtonsoft.json or json.net. So if you search the web for examples and JSON and C#, you see lots of examples that use these. Again, it's an external package. You can add to your application, and you can see the package details here on newtonsoft.com/json. I installed the package myself, and and used it. But you know, there's a nice example here. You can click through to this link and you'll see an example of how to process JSON using Newtonsoft.json. And there's another one for serializing a C# object to JSON string using this .NET fiddle here. I find for my application that system.text.json, just namespace, that does everything for me. If you have complex JSON, however, and you want to convert to a C# object, you could actually use the online JSON C classes converter here in order to make this work. And it's a useful, and there's some nice examples on how to make that work and practice as well. Okay. Really, that's it. Okay, so we learned about processing JSON with C# using the system.text.json namespace. We saw a few fun things as well to do with serialization, deserialization, and working with objects and files and so forth, and pulling a lot together. Okay, we leave it there. Thank you very much for watching.